Pokemon Volt White is a ROM hack made by Drayano that makes the 5th generation a lot more difficult, and I'm gonna attempt to beat a hardcore Nuzlocke where I'm only allowed to capture the first Pokemon I find per route, and if any of them should faint, they'll have to be boxed forever. I also have to play on set mode and can't overlevel the next gym leader's highest level Pokemon, and my Volt White adventure begins pretty normally with the standard Gen 5 starter selection. Drayano has made changes to every single one of these guys, which is something I had no idea about. All I'd seen were the insane gym leader teams, and I'd been told Lenora is an absolute menace. So naturally I pick up Tepig so that I'll have a fighting type, right? Bianca then comes up with a brilliant idea to have a Pokemon battle in my room. Yeah, I'm dead.
As for your room, Axel, or what's left of it, you're disowned!
And so, taking my first steps into permanent exile and realizing my only way of getting by will be waging money on Pokemon battles, I run into a Bidoof. This first encounter is not ideal. As much as I love Bidoof, Oko here has Moody, which is incredibly annoying to work with. This made me really happy to see my second encounter on Route 2 being a Poochyena, but that was before realizing we only get one more encounter before having to take on the first gym. And luckily, we can guarantee that encounter is a grass type since we're about to face a full team of 6 water types. Unfortunately, that grass type is Pansage. And oh, it's a rotation battle. Not only did this catch me off guard, it's gonna make the battle a whole lot more difficult. An interesting thing about rotation battles is you don't actually lose your stat boosts as you rotate around. And so, as Squirtle sets up with Iron Defense, I at least get an attack boost with Howl. From there, I rotate into Kibo and go for Magical Leaf to hit Squirtle on the special side since it's setting up its defense. Now that Kibo's in the lead, I was really expecting Crest to rotate into Oshawott and go for an Air Slash, so I rotate to Poochyena, who oddly gets hit with a Brine. I then go for Bite, which with the attack boost deals over half to Oshawott, and the following turn, Crest simply allows me to take out Squirtle with another Magical Leaf. This kinda just makes things worse since Piplup knows Icy Wind. So I rotate into Tepig and go for a Tackle as Totodile goes for Dragon Dance. I was expecting difficulty, but Drayano, this is the first gym. I was really expecting Crest to want to destroy Tepig with an Aqua Jet here, but he simply allows me to take out Oshawott with a Vine Whip. It's however immediately replaced with another threat against Kibo since Mudkip knows Ice Ball, which is exactly what I thought I was switching into when Tepig takes half from a Bubble Beam. I rotate back to Kibo as Crest puts forth Mudkip, which gets hit by a Vine Whip, doing a lot of damage. I risk not rotating to go for another Vine Whip, which ends up taking out Mudkip, sending in Crest's final Pokemon, Panpour. He immediately sets up with Nasty Plot, which means we really have to deal with this thing right away. And sadly, another Vine Whip does just under half. And because Crest is a greedy son of a jinx, he rotates back into Totodile to tank the next Vine Whip, all to set up another Dragon Dance. Because Totodile's in the red, I know Crest is gonna go for a potion, so I just stay in here and go for another Vine Whip, which unfortunately doesn't take Totodile out. At this point, Totodile's simply faster, so there's nothing I can do but stay in and Vine Whip, which actually lets me take care of Piplup. He then oddly also rotates into Panpour, going for Protect, and then hitting me with a +2 Water Gun, which at least doesn't do too much. Unfortunately though, the Panpour does survive and get some health back with an Oranberry before hitting me with another Water Gun, taking me into the yellow before I can take it out. This puts me in a terrible spot, with 3 Pokemon below half health, with no priority moves and no way to outspeed this Totodile that can simply take out any of my Pokemon in one hit. My only hope is that Bidoof survives one hit after one of my Pokemon goes down. So I sacrifice Kibo. Hold on a second, Totodile goes for a 3rd Dragon Dance? I mean, that's definitely okay with me. It simply gives me the win and I don't have to lose any Pokemon, but that was pretty stressful. With the first gym badge out of the way, I knew I'd be facing Lenora, but luckily I can evolve Tepig. The bad news is Drayano has made it a fire ground type and not fighting. I mean, that's much cooler, but it also makes me look like a complete dumbass. Anyway, the new level cap also lets me evolve Oko into B-Barrel and gives me access to a few new areas like Route 3 where I pick up a Tailo. In Wellspring Cave, I find an Aron, which is extremely useful since it quad resists normal. And now with access to the fishing rod, I can backtrack and head to Striaton City where I pick up a Staryu. Finally, I can head to Pinwheel Forest, and I decide to get my encounter in the outer part, which ends up really paying off since it's a Metatite. Finally, when getting Poochyena to the level cap of 20, I can have it evolve into Mightyena. Lenora, the normal type gym leader, actually kind of difficult in the base game itself. And in this ROM hack, not only has her team been bumped up to 11, it's a double battle. And to make matters a lot more annoying to plan for, she starts out with not one, but two Intimidators. I do at least have an Intimidator of my own, so I can lower both Stantler and Herdier's attack by one stage, but both Aron and Mightyena effectively have their attack stat halved because of the double Intimidate. For this reason, my Pokemon basically won't be dealing any damage as possible, so the first thing I do is swap out of Mightyena into Kibo. Lenora gets to work right away, boosting up Stantler's attack with a helping hand from Herdier, but after my Intimidate, it doesn't quite do half, and I go for a Mud Slap to lower Stantler's attack. The biggest reason for doing this is I don't want her to go for Hypnosis, and if I lower her accuracy, I figure the AI won't even bother. Once I swap in Mightyena again, I get off another Intimidate, but Lenora has learned from her mistakes, and this time goes for Extrasensory instead. With my classic luck, she of course gets a flinch as well, so I don't get to further lower her accuracy, but I do manage to take out about half of her health and get a defense drop the next turn with a Crunch. I'm also able to get another accuracy drop again with Mud Slap before swapping Mightyena out the next turn and sending in Raga Draga. And despite our boy not being a fighting type in this game, it still gets access to Arm Thrust before level 20, still making him a very valuable member of the team, especially if we can keep him alive for Burgh. With Stantler in Super Potion range, you'd think Lenora would be smart enough not to use Helping Hand, but she actually just gives me a completely free turn to go for a Flame Charge and set up my speed. This makes Raga Draga the fastest mon on the field the next turn, and we can easily OHKO the Stantler in 2 hits. I then get bitten by the dog and set up my defense to +2 with Aron before she sends in B-Barrel. And in this moment, I kinda got tunnel vision. I really didn't want to get hit by a quad effective Aqua Tail, so I swap out into Kibo. But Lenora's entire gimmick is Retaliate being more powerful if a Pokemon fainted the previous turn, so I really should have seen that coming. I make sure to lower its accuracy with a Mud Slap, but unfortunately it increases its evasiveness with Moody. I've got to deal with this thing before Moody gets out of hand, and luckily Joda manages to land a Force Palm the very next turn that takes it out in 1 hit. Herdier then manages to get a crit Retaliate, but because of the +2 and quad resisting it, it really doesn't do anything at all, and I lower Herdier's accuracy with another Mud Slap before she sends in Bouffalant. Because Bouffalant has a quad effective fighting move against Aron, I decide to swap into Mightyena and get an Intimidate. But to my great surprise, I wouldn't even have had to, since a single Force Palm is enough to take Bouffalant out. The dog then bites me again, and Lenora sends in Furret. Because Bouffalant fainted last turn, we're at risk of getting hit by a very powerful Retaliate here, so I go for Detect with Joda, as the Furret just goes for Follow Me. That thing has some really annoying special moves, so I was definitely going to be aiming for it with my Crunch anyway. The next turn, Herdier does power up Furret's Reversal with a Helping Hand, but because Furret's attack is pretty miserable, it's not even enough to take Dogmeat out, even as a super effective hit. From there, it's my turn, taking out Herdier with a Crunch and the remainder of Furret's health with a Force Palm. Somehow, we've taken out 5 of Lenora's Pokemon, so she's left with a 2-on-1. With both of her Pokemon falling last turn, I really don't want to get hit by Retaliate here, so I swap into Blightsteel to be able to quad resist it and go for a Detect so that Joda doesn't get taken out. Having protected myself from the Retaliate, I swap out of Blightsteel again back into Dogmeat to get another Intimidate. This ends up working out perfectly since Watchdog targets Mightyena with a Crunch, which barely deals any damage at all but does manage to get the defense drop. Joda then connects with a Force Palm, which just barely misses out on the KO. To make up for it, we manage to get the Paralysis, which simply means we outspeed the following turn. And while we sadly lost Kibo, who did carry the last gym fight, I was expecting to lose so much more. As for the Bug-type gym we have coming up, I felt pretty good about the team we have, especially after evolving a Kim into Swellow. While in Castelia, I also made sure to pick up these Water Stones. Then before taking on the gym, I made sure to search for my encounter on Route 4, which could not have been any better. Okay, the Modest Nature literally couldn't have been any worse, but it's still a fire type. Going up against Burgh, we are once again faced with a double battle. He leads the fight with a Vespiquen and Masquerain, and both of these two have been buffed a lot in this Romhack. Masquerain is now a bug water type, just like Surskit, and Vespiquen, of course, has Intimidate. Personally, I lead with Swellow and Mightyena to get an Intimidate of my own, and because Swellow is incredibly strong. My first wing attack even gets a critical hit, but at -1, it would have been enough to take it out together with the Crunch. Vespiquen then poisons Mightyena with Toxic before Burgh sends in Scolipede. These two don't really have any moves that threaten Swellow too much, so I stay in and go for a wing attack, which unfortunately doesn't do too much damage. Scolipede then connects with a Rock Climb, dealing way more damage than I expected, but to compensate for it, I managed to get a burn with Mightyena's Fire Fang. This is insanely huge, since Scolipede pretty much isn't part of the fight anymore. Vespiquen, on the other hand, connects with a super effective U-turn, which at least deals a bit less damage because of the Intimidate, as he then sends in Leavanny. At this point, Mightyena could be knocked out by anything, so I swap out into Pignite, hoping that they go for bug moves. However, Swellow gets to move first, and even after an Intimidate, a quad effective wing attack is way more than enough to take out Leavanny. Scolipede then goes for a resisted Megahorn, but manages to get a poison with with Poison Touch. From here, Burgh sends in Heracross, which is absolutely perfect, because just like Leavanny, it too is quad weak to flying, and despite the Intimidate drop, we can knock it out in one hit. Scolipede then goes for Rock Slide, but because of the burn, I'm not afraid of it at all, and I can retaliate with a Flame Charge, not only boosting my speed, but also taking Scolipede out. This leaves Burgh with his two final Pokemon, Yanmega and Vespiquen. Unfortunately, this also means we're struck with another Intimidate, putting Akim's attack down to half. And so, with both of my Pokemon powered down and at such low health, I decide to swap out, sending in Krenko and Oko. Yanmega hits Oko with an Air Slash, which doesn't quite do half, and Vespiquen misses Toxic. Finally, at the end of the turn, Yanmega gets a speed boost, and Oko raises its attack with Moody, and unfortunately lowers its special defense, putting it in range of an Air Slash. Oddly, Yanmega goes for a Signal Beam, which Oko actually manages to survive, but of course he misses the rollout. Krenko at least deals some great damage with Fire Punch, even getting a burn, and Vespiquen once again misses Toxic. I wanted to at least try to save Oko, so I swap out into Aron, but Yanmega targets Krenko instead, and the Air Slash immediately gets a critical hit, taking out Krenko in one shot. Vespiquen just goes for Heal Order, getting itself all the way back up to full. With all of my Pokemon super low, I had no choice but to send back in Oko. Burgh at least heals up Yanmega with a Full Restore, which allows Oko to live, and this time connect with a Rollout, which doesn't quite deal half. Vespiquen strangely targets Aron with Acrobatics, which barely does anything since it's quad resisted. And sadly, Aron's Iron Head just isn't enough to put Yanmega in range of being taken out by Burn. And the following turn, I get extremely disrespected as Yanmega protects itself against Rollout, allowing Vespiquen to knock off Oko's final hit point. At this point, there's only one thing that can outspeed this Yanmega, and it's Akim's extreme speed. But it comes at a pretty steep cost, because while we don't instantly lose the run to Yanmega now, there's nothing protecting Akim from being taken out by an Acrobatics. Finally, all we need to do is deal with Vespiquen, but the stakes are still pretty high. I fire off a Flame Charge with Ragadraga, hoping to take Vespiquen out, but it leaves it in the red. And unfortunately, this leaves our starter wide open to an Acrobatics, which falls just 1 HP short of taking us out. And even though we're poisoned, because the battle ended this turn, despite having lost half of our team, we at least didn't lose our starter too. With most of our current roster boxed forever, we really need to find some new encounters. So before I make my way to Nimbasa City, I make sure to head to the Desert Resort, where my first encounter is a Trapinch. And heck, with a level cap at 38, we can even immediately evolve it into Vibrava. While in the Desert Resort, I also make sure to go to the ruins where I find a Golett. And as far as I'm concerned, the more ground types, the merrier, even if they can't use any held items. I then head to Route 16, where I pick up an Electrike. From there, I make a quick pit stop in the Lost Lorn Forest, where my encounter is a Surskit. First, I must tell you, I am the king of Team Plasma. Excuse me, what? Are you even talking to me? What the fuck? As a final preparation for Elesa, I get Ragadraga to the level cap, which allows him to evolve into his final form, Emboar. Despite this being a Romhack, there's only ever been space in this region for one Miss Unova. And if I have to defeat Elesa one more time to prove that that someone is definitely me, then so be it. With this being a single battle, it felt incredibly easy to prepare for. We start by facing a Molga, which can outspeed us, but not after I go for a Flame Charge. I then try to be efficient and go for a Sucker Punch, but unfortunately a Molga goes for Roost. So instead, I simply outspeed it the following turn and destroy it with a Heat Crash. Elesa then sends in Ampharos, which I simply would have outsped anyway and taken out with a Bulldoze. Raichu is third, which faces the exact same fate. This leaves the half of Elisa's team that's faster than Ragadraga even after the Flame Charge. Only thing is, they don't have a lot of good moves to hit me with. Galvantula tries with an Energy Ball, but ultimately just gets Heat Crashed. Manectric comes in next and can only really hit me with Flamethrower, which of course is resisted. So it too is promptly removed with a Bulldoze. Finally, she only has Zebstrika, which puts up the greatest effort with a double kick that actually lands a critical hit, at which point I was very much regretting not going for another Flame Charge against Galvantula. But ultimately, another Bulldoze was enough, because in the end, this woman really can't handle me. My oh my, you have a sweet fighting style. I already told you, it's a ground style, not fighting. Once in Driftvale City, I pick up my encounter on Route 6, a Minun. At least my luck by the cold storage was a bit better, where I encountered a Sneasel, especially since the Razor Claw is right right there to be picked up. Then to prepare for the gym, I start by evolving Aleela into Masquerain. I use the Razor Claw to evolve Finn into Weavile, and finally I put those Water Stones I picked up in Castelia to use by evolving Jeweled Lotus into Starmie. In the base games, Clay is one of the more difficult gym leaders of all time, but in this hack, he's been made even more deadlier, specifically by leading with a Sandstream Pokemon in Hippowdon, and then having a Swords Dancing Excadrill with Sand Rush. If I don't deal with that thing before it sets up, it's instantly gonna be game over. As for Hippowdon, the sand only boosts the special defense of Rock type, so I can take it out in one Scald. Clay then sends in Marowak, which unfortunately has a similar issue. And with the first third of Clay's team defeated in the first couple turns, I was feeling pretty good until he sent in Excadrill. Because he sees the KO with a super effective Rock Slide, I expect him to go for it, sending in Animar. And even though the hit does barely anything, this is a bit of a gamble. Excadrill goes for a Swords Dance as I go for Magnitude. Very fortunately, I get a Magnitude 9, which is more than enough to take Excadrill out. Anything less than a 7 and I would have been in trouble. I did have a backup plan just in case, but it would have lost us a few team members. Fourth, he sends in Seismitoad, so I'm expecting a Muddy Water and swap back into Aleela to resist it. I don't exactly have a great move to go for here, so I just fire off a Silver Wind for damage, which does about a third. Seismitoad then goes for Sludge Wave, and so not wanting to take another one, I decide to just go for a U-turn. This way, I can get a bit of chip damage as I swap in Finn, who barely takes anything from the incoming Sludge Wave. And with Seismitoad at less than half of its health remaining, it simply can't stand an Ice Punch. With 4 Pokemon down, Clay sends in Steelix, and I definitely have to swap out. Even with a low kick, there's no way Weavile's taking out Steelix in one hit. So I swap out into Animar, and annoyingly, the Steelix starts going for Coil. Realistically, I would have wanted to swap in Masquerain here, but it's too risky at such low HP, and so I'm stuck dealing terrible damage as this thing sets up its defense. My second Magnitude does actually get a critical hit, which takes Steelix down fairly low as it just continues to coil up. And with all those coils, not even a Magnitude 8 is enough to take Steelix out. And while Animar can just barely survive the incoming +3 Earthquake, Clay then heals up with a Hyper Potion. This gives me 2 free Magnitudes, but since neither of them get critical hits, it basically doesn't touch Steelix. In the end, I'm forced to sacrifice Animar since nothing wants to take a +3 Earthquake on the Switch. However, it did manage to break Steelix's sturdy and take it down to about half, meaning even after a Pasho Berry, the super effective Scald is enough to take it out. And with Steelix defeated, Clay only has one Pokemon left, his Crocodile. And Aleela is definitely the MVP of the fight as she takes out Crocodile in one hit from full health. For a single battle, that was nuts, and from here on out, there are no gyms that are singles. Heading to Mistralton, we have to pass through Charged Stone Cave where I pick up a Joltik. A pretty good encounter with an upcoming flying gym, and with the level cap now as high as 56, we can evolve Vibrava into Flygon. Then once my Repel runs out in Celestial Tower, I run into a Ghastly. And from there, I needed to put together a team, so I evolved Joltik into Galvantula, Electrike into Manectric, and Lairon into Aggron. And with my team half full of electric types, I had never been more ready to take on a gym. Oh, fuck. Against Skyla, we have our first triple battle, and these are even more chaotic than doubles, but I came in with a bit of a plan. I send in 2 electric types either side of my ground type starter. This way, as Galvantula and Manectric go for discharge, it won't actually hit my team, while simultaneously hitting 2 of hers. I even managed to take out Skarmory despite its sturdy because of the 2 hits. Mandibuzz then goes for Torment, and Braviary just sets up with a bulk up before she sends in Archeops. Because of Torment, I unfortunately can't go for discharge, so I have to Electroweb, which isn't quite enough to take Mandibuzz out. And even though this lowers both Archeops and Mandibuzz's speed, sadly, Gen 5 doesn't have dynamic speed, so I get hit by an Earthquake immediately. However, because it's a spread move, it doesn't deal too much damage, and I can take both it and Braviary out with another discharge. Mandibuzz just goes for rest, healing all the way back up to full, and then getting rid of the sleep with a Chesto Berry. Finally, at the end of the turn, Ragadraga goes for a Flame Charge to boost its speed and deal just a little bit of chip to Mandibuzz. Skyla then sends in her 2 remaining Pokemon, Swanna and Gliscor. I really don't want Ragadraga to get hit by a quad-effective water-type move, so I swap out into Minun. This is my best bet since I plan to go for my discharge strategy once again. And it pretty much backfires immediately since I paralyze Winota as soon as she comes in. Mandibuzz at least also gets paralyzed, and Swanna simply gets taken out. This unfortunately leaves Manectric without an enemy target, so I just end up hitting myself, which sets Gliscor up perfectly to get a double kill with Earthquake against my electric type. types. Yeah, that didn't exactly go to plan. To make matters worse, Mandibuzz still hasn't moved and sets up Gliscor's speed with Tailwind. Not to even mention it setting up its Poison Heal. I then send in Weavile and Aggron, and even though Skyla goes for a Hyper Potion, because Mandibuzz is paralyzed, I can easily take it out in one shot with an Electro Ball because of the insane speed difference. I used Fake Out with Weavile so Gliscor doesn't get a turn. I then make sure to go for Protect with Blightsteel in order to dodge the Earthquake. Finn still gets hit, but because the damage is spread, it really doesn't do too much. Which means finally, a quad-effective Ice Punch finishes the fight. Not too graceful, and oh, however will I go on without my dear beloved Minun. On my way to Icarus City, I pass through Twist Mountain and pick up a Piloswine. And now that I've got Surf, I backtrack to Mistralton Cave where my first encounter is a Beldum. And with Steel resisting both Ice and Dragon, Metagross is a pretty huge pickup. Speaking of those two gym leaders, the first of them we face is Brycen, the Master of Ice types, in a double battle. Here we have to face off against his Hail team, so I lead off with Emboar and Metagross as Abomasnow sets up the snow. I immediately go for Bullet Punch, and I know this isn't going to take Glaceon out, but I need to get some damage on it. This does mean I have to eat an Earth Power, but it would take the highest of rolls to take me out with a crit. I then go for a quad-effective Flame Charge to take out Abomasnow, which also increases Ragadraga's speed. Once Beartic comes out, this means I'll be faster, but not faster than Shurikai's Priority, who can take out Glaceon before a Fire Punch destroys the Polar Bear. And this means we've pretty effortlessly destroyed half of Brycen's team already. From here, he sends in Vanillix and Frostlass. And at this point, things really aren't looking good for Brycen. I start by going for Bullet Punch, which I definitely thought would take Frostlass out. This could be a bit of an issue, but first I take care of Vanillix with a Fire Punch from Ragadraga. As punishment for my recklessness, Shurikai gets hit with a Thunderbolt, but just barely manages to survive. And ironically, Frostlass goes down to its own Life Orb. In fact, Frostlass left Shurikai with just enough HP to survive the hail. Finally, he's only got Cryogonal left, and because it has paper-thin defenses, it would go down to a single Bullet Punch if it weren't for a Focus Sash. However, Ragadraga is simply faster because of that Flame Charge, and we claim our 7th gym badge. Oh my Arceus, it's that guy from the Ferris wheel. What do you think, Axel? What do I think it's short for Nathan, maybe? Maybe Naruto? It looks like everyone is here. Oh yeah, Sharon's here. Everyone. I bet you meant Sharon. Real epic that Sharon is here. After our interaction with the bad guys, in preparation for the gym, I make sure to evolve into Mamoswine. Before we can take on the Elite Four to win that sweet, sweet prize money to prove our mother wrong, we have to take on Iris in another triple battle. And against her overwhelming stampede of dragons, it's not gonna be easy. I start by going for a Fake Out against Gyarados, which does end up getting a critical hit that doesn't really matter. The whole point of going for Fake Out here is to deal just enough damage to put Gyarados in range even after it reduces the damage of our electric gem boosted Thunderbolt with a Wakan Berry. Her Gyarados has Dragon Dance and Moxie, and we just really need to get rid of it. From there, Miram goes for a Dragon Gem boosted Dragon Claw to take out the Druddigon. We don't really want to take any chances here, and we especially can't let her attack Miram with that thing. I do in turn have to take a bit of damage from both Rough Skin and Rocky Helmet, but it's worth it in the end. Finally, Altaria goes for Cotton Guard, boosting its defense all the way to +3 in one go before Iris sends in Haxorus and Dragonite. Haxorus is by far the biggest threat here. Also, with Dragon Dance, we definitely need to get rid of this thing as soon as possible. Fortunately, we can simply send a Nevermelt Ice boosted Ice Punch its way, and it's dealt with. Because of multi-scale, Dragonite is a little bit trickier. Even a quad-effective Ice Beam from Starmie just barely deals over half and activates its Citrus Berry. Because Miram can't reach Altaria anyway, I Dragon Claw the Dragonite, which is enough to take it out. But because I neglected to attack Altaria, this leads to something I didn't even think would be possible. As it fires off its Dragon Pulse, I realize it's managed to hit Miram from all the way on the other side of the field. Something I didn't even think you could do in a triple battle. Maybe because it was a beam, maybe because the game just hates me that much. Regardless, my lack of game knowledge had let Flygon down. And despite that being the case, we still have a Kingdra to defeat. I start by targeting Altaria with Finn. After that Cotton Guard, I know a physical attack won't take it out, I just need it to outspeed and burn the Yacha Berry. I even managed to freeze the stupid thing before taking it out with a quad-effective Ice Beam. Finally, I'd taken it down. But Kingdra just became a formidable enemy by doubling both the power of its water move and its speed with Swift Swim, and an Air Slash from Aleela barely does anything. I swap out of Finn and send in Shurikai. Kingdra then goes for a Dragon Pulse, which takes Elesa down to half HP. All I can do is use my most powerful moves, so I send a Thunderbolt, which takes Kingdra down below half as a Bug Buzz leaves it with just a sliver of HP. From there, because Shurikai's unable to reach it, I have to swap back out into Finn. Iris then, of course, uses a Hyper Potion, but this time, my Thunderbolt gets a critical hit, taking Kingdra below half, putting Kingdra just barely in range to be taken out by a Bug Buzz. And so I'd done it. I'd managed to beat the final gym, but it came at the cost of Flygon, who so desperately wanted to join me in the Hall of Fame. With all the badges collected, I could start making my way through Victory Road. And here I'd be able to find my final encounter, which ended up being a Zweilous. In regular Black and White, this is a terrible encounter to get since you can't evolve it into Hydreigon before the Elite Four level cap. But with the Volt White level cap at 73, we can easily do so. I then head to the box and pick up the Ghastly we found in Celestial Tower and evolve it into Gengar. And with that, I'd put together my Elite Four team, beginning with Ragadraga, my starter, with Fire Punch, Earthquake, Superpower, and Sucker Punch. Finn the Technician with Fake Out, Ice Punch, Feint Attack, and Revenge. Because with Technician, Feint Attack is simply stronger than Night Slash. Jeweled Lotus the Stormy with Surf, Psychic, Ice Beam, and Aura Sphere. Prosper the Gengar with Shadow Ball, Dark Pulse, Aura Sphere, and Psychic. Shurikai the Analytic Metagross with Iron Head, Zen Headbutt, Hammer Arm, and Bullet Punch. And finally, Tiamat the Hydreigon with Dragon Pulse, Earth Power, Dark Pulse, and Protect. With each of the Elite Four fights being insane double battles, I was going to have to craft some equally insane strategies to even stand a chance. First, I decide to take on Marshall. He's probably my worst matchup, so I wanted to make sure I fight him while I have as many Pokemon as possible. He begins with Sawk and Throw, and Sawk is particularly annoying because of that Sturdy ability. So I make sure to break Sturdy with Bullet Punch before taking Sawk out with a Psychic. This of course gives Throw a free turn to do whatever it wants, and the worst thing it can do is fling a Flame Orb at Shurikai to burn it, which ends up happening to Starmie instead. I did give Shurikai a Ross Berry in case that would happen, but the burn doesn't actually affect Jeweled Lotus's power. Marshall then sends in Mienshao, but this isn't really a problem since Starmie's faster and we can simply knock it out with a single Psychic. Once again, this leaves Throw, who's simply slower than Metagross and just falls to a Zen Headbutt. This means in 2 turns we've managed to take out half of Marshall's team, but his 2 most dangerous ones are yet to come. One of them is Breloom, and instead of sending in Conkeldurr, he sends in Poliwrath. Expecting Breloom to hit me with a Bullet Seed, I swap out into Tiamat. The Poliwrath then does go for Vacuum Wave, which basically does nothing to Shurikai and wouldn't have been a problem if it hit Tiamat. Hydreigon then resists the Bullet Seed, which barely does anything, and with a Zen Headbutt, I want to get Breloom down into healing range and waste its Focus Sash. This way, I know Marshall will go for a Full Restore and Breloom won't attack me that turn. I can then go for Protect to dodge Poliwrath's Vacuum Wave and simply take it out with an Analytic boosted Zen Headbutt. Finally, Marshall only has Conkeldurr to send in, and very likely he's going to target Tiamat with Mach Punch from both of his Pokemon. So I swap to Prosper, who's immune to Breloom's Mach Punch, which simply gets knocked out by a Zen Headbutt right afterwards. Conkeldurr opted to not go for priority, instead using Drain Punch, which also doesn't affect Prosper. The next turn, I go for a Psychic, taking the Conkeldurr down into the red and let Shurikai finish the job with a Zen Headbutt. Overall, a pretty manageable effort for the team. Making my way to the next room, we face the Psychic-type Master Caitlyn, and for this fight, my team was simply a lot better matched up. I lead with Ragadraga and Tiamat and immediately have Ragadraga go for a Dark Gem boosted Sucker Punch into Sigilif. This gives it just enough power to take out the stupid bird thing in one shot. From there, Tiamat goes for Dark Pulse, which is simply enough to take Musharna out. Caitlyn then sends in Bronzong and Gothitelle, which is now a Psychic Dark type. This is a bit of a problem since it means my Dark Pulse won't actually be super effective, only doing about 2/3 to Gothitelle and activating its Citrus Berry to take it up above half. To deal with this issue, I target it with Ragadraga's Fire Punch as well, but this gives Bronzong a free move, and it really sucks to just let it set up Trick Room for free. The only silver lining is that Bronzong and Beheeyem really can't do much to me. Bronzong tries to rest at full HP, and Beheeyem launches a resisted Energy Ball into Tiamat. So I simply Fire Punch to knock out Bronzong, and Dark Pulse into Beheeyem to knock them both out. This means Caitlyn only has Reuniclus left, and I simply target it with both Sucker Punch and Dark Pulse, but the Sucker Punch ends up being enough for a very easy victory. Our next opponent is Grimsley, and this matchup is not quite as good, mostly because he's got some really tricky strategies up his sleeve. Firstly, I need a way to deal with his Liepard, so I send in Weavile and Starmie to go for a fake out and immobilize his Liepard for a turn. This means Starmie doesn't get faked out, and I can guarantee the KO versus Sharpedo, which would otherwise be an incredibly big problem with its speed boost ability. Third, Grimsley sends in Absol, which is the perfect way to end phase 1 of the fight. To conclude said operation, I simply take out Liepard's remaining health with an Ice Punch, and I let a Fighting Gem boosted Aurasphere do the talking against Absol. With phase 1 concluded, we've got to face some of our more dodgy matchups. I was really hoping we wouldn't face Houndoom next, but with Weavile out, of course he sends in Bisharp and Houndoom. On top of that, Houndoom has Intimidate, which really makes a lot of sense and probably should be that way in the base game too. But with both of our Pokemon now weak to both of our enemies, we really have to switch out. In case they want to use Dark moves into Starmie, I swap out into Tiamat. Then if they want to go for Steel or Fire moves against Weavile, I swap out into Emboar. My plan ends up working out perfectly as Houndoom goes for Dark Pulse against Tiamat and Bisharp hits Emboar with an X-Scissor. From there, I launch a super effective Earth Power against Bisharp, which is enough to take it out. Houndoom then goes for Hidden Power, and I didn't actually know what Hidden Power this was, but even super effective, it doesn't really deal any damage to us. Ragadraga then goes for Fire Punch, which is just to break Houndoom's Focus Sash. Not wanting Tiamat to get Brave Birded, I decide to go for Protect. Instead, Tiamat dodges the resisted Fire Blast, and it's Ragadraga who gets hit by a powerful Brave Bird. From there, Ragadraga goes for Earthquake, which, because of Levitate and Honchkro's Flying type, only actually hits Houndoom, and with a Ground Gem, we can guarantee that it takes Houndoom out. With only Honchkrow remaining, I go for a Sucker Punch to deal a bit of damage and put it in range of being KO'd by a Dragon Pulse. Definitely not as smooth as the other two fights, but at least we got through deathless. Finally, we have to face Chantal, and Ghost is possibly our best matchup of the bunch. I simply lead with my two Dark types, Tiamat and Finn. From there, I get to work, taking out Drifblim with a Feint Attack and Golurk with a Dark Pulse. She next sends in Chandelure and Jellicent. Jellicent's weaker on the physical side, so I knock it out with Feint Attack, and Chandelure takes the Dark Pulse. Finally, we face Mismagius and Frostlass, and with the same reasoning, I go for Feint Attack against Mismagius with its really low physical bulk, and knock out the Frostlass with an Expert Belt boosted Dark Pulse for a guaranteed KO. And with that extraordinary display from my team, I'd made it all the way through the Elite Four fights without losing a single Pokemon. But in my way of becoming the champion and claiming my much-needed prize earnings stood Team Plasma. Before me was a fight against a formidable opponent, and should I beat his ridiculous team, another lay waiting in the shadows with no time to change up my lead in between. Going into the fight versus Crazy Ferris Wheel Guy, I was very glad to have all 6 of my team members. Nathaniel is an incredibly scary final boss, and if you didn't know any better, you'd actually think he's leading this fight with his Reshiram. I lead with Starmie in order to immediately fire off an Aurasphere. This doesn't make any sense into a Reshiram, but into his lead Zoroark, it takes it out in one hit. But with Zoroark defeated, we now run into the real issues. His second Pokemon, Electivire, is one of said issues, and as I swap into Tiamat, I really wanted to give this thing a Ground Gem in order to take Electivire out in one hit. It's just that I need another item. However, Electivire can actually help me out by going for its Electric Gem boosted Volt Tackle. This way it takes just enough recoil damage that we guarantee the KO with Earth Power. Which brings us to the reason why I couldn't give Tiamat the Ground Gem in the first place, Reshiram. A plain Dragon Pulse simply isn't enough to take this level 75 Legendary out, meaning I had no choice but to boost Tiamat's Dragon Pulse with a Dragon Gem. And with that 50% boost, we've got just enough power to knock Reshiram out. With half of N's Pokemon defeated, we've depleted a lot of our items. And next he sends in his Porygon Z, which does have Ice Beam, so I swap out into Shorakai. And with Ice Beam being a resisted hit, we barely take any damage at all. PZ then goes for a normal gem boosted Tri-Attack, but we resist this hit as well, so the worst thing that could happen is we get statused. And luckily, that doesn't end up being an issue, allowing me to Hammer Arm away, getting the analytic boost, and easily taking it out in one hit. There is the issue of our speed getting lowered, but we were always going to outspeed Aerodactyl anyway with a Steel Gem boosted Bullet Punch. Because a low roll of a regular Bullet Punch might just leave Aerodactyl alive, I decided not to take any chances and take it out with a Steel Gem, leaving N with only Slowking. His Slowking is holding a Water Gem, so this next hit will do a bit of damage, so I decide to swap out into Jeweled Lotus. This way, his Slowking doesn't actually have any moves that aren't resisted. So the next turn, I freely go for a Thunderbolt, but because of Slowking's massive special defense, it survives just below half and goes for another Surf. This leaves Starmie deep in the yellow, and with another Thunderbolt, we finish off the Slowking, and thus the fight. And even though N heals up our Pokemon, we still have one fight left to go. With no opportunity to change up our team, we have to start the fight versus Ghetsis with Starmie, which is definitely not that ideal a matchup against his Dark-type Drapion. So expecting him to go for a Night Slash, I immediately swap out into Tiamat, who's able to resist it. But instead of attacking, the Drapion sets up a layer of Toxic Spikes before I destroy it with an Earth Power. Even without a Ground Gem, we've got more than enough power to take Drapion out. This leads Ghetsis to send in his own Hydreigon. But despite his having the level advantage, my Hydreigon is actually faster, and all we need to knock it out is a single Dragon Pulse. But this makes way for his strongest Pokemon, Genesect. But because this is part of the plan, his Genesect gets an attack boost instead of a special attack from download. Expecting to be taken out by a Bug Buzz here, I swap out into Ragadraga, but the Genesect instead sets up with a Rock Polish. Luckily, Genesect doesn't actually have any effective moves against Ragadraga, so he goes for Ice Beam to at least deal neutral damage. Emboar then goes for a 4-time super effective Fire Punch, which takes Genesect down to its Focus Sash. This will prompt Ghetsis to go for a Full Restore, which in his case is actually pretty bad, because now that his Focus Sash is used up, there's nothing stopping Ragadraga from simply taking Genesect out this time with Fire Punch. But with Genesect defeated, he reveals his next giant threat, Gyarados. Because this thing has both Dragon Dance and Moxie, I really can't let it take me out, so I swap out into Jeweled Lotus. I expected he'd go for Aqua Tail instead of a Dragon Dance here, since it's an Ultra KO against Ragadraga. Starmie, on the other hand, can easily survive it and just take Gyarados out the following turn with a quad-effective Thunderbolt. At this point, we've got 4 of Ghetsis' Pokemon defeated, and Electros is next. Wanting to get a clean switch, I decided to just stay in and go for Surf. It doesn't quite end up doing half, but Electros actually misses Thunder. I decided to just stay in anyway and go for another Surf, and this time I get a higher roll, which simply takes Electros out. And with Starmie able to survive the poison, I knew it was meant to be. As Ghetsis sent in his final Pokemon Dusknoir, I couldn't just let Jeweled Lotus go down. So I make one final switch into Tiamat to tank the payback. But Dusknoir is a really bulky Pokemon, and sadly Dark Pulse just isn't quite enough to take it out. And after it gets a bit of health back with a Citrus Berry, the worst it can do to me is burn me with Will-O-Wisp. Which means with a second final Dark Pulse, I hadn't quite done it. I hadn't managed to claim the prize money from the champion, but I'd done something even better. I beat a Pokemon Volt White Hardcore Nuzlocke, and Drayano never fails to impress me. So if you'd like me to try and beat Pokemon Volt White 2, it's a lot more difficult, so maybe we should try and do it on stream. Let me know in the comments down below. But until we see each other next time, subscribe!